We are officially past the NBA trade deadline, and that doesn't mean trades won't continue to be reported. In fact, I'm expecting to see maybe something on Cam Johnson at this point. We'll see what happens. But we do have a number of trades that happened over the course of the last hour since the last upload. I needed to let that video get some breathing room. But we're going to cover them here. It's a lot of smaller deals, but I want to kind of talk about these. I hope you guys enjoy. Make sure you hit that thumbs up and subscribe. And if you guys are fans of any of these teams, let me know in the comments how you guys feel about some of the trades that were made. First things first. The Memphis Grizzlies are making a number of moves. They're trading Jake LaRavia from Memphis to Sacramento. And, there is another piece in here about them trading Marcus Smart. The Memphis Grizzlies are trading Smart and a 2025 first-round pick to Washington in a multi-team trade that sends 2 second-round picks to Memphis in exchange, and this allows them some roster flexibility. First thing to note, I assume that this is just the first little inklings of this. I am thinking maybe Memphis is trying to get in on Cam Johnson. I don't really know what else they could maybe be trying to do, unless they were trying to get in somebody like Vucevic or something, but that seems like the most likely case. We'll see what winds up happening. Maybe there's somebody else that's on the market that we're not really aware of, but they're moving off of a first, moving off of Smart. We talked about that a good bit here, but they're also moving off of LaRavia, who I thought they should have probably tried to retain, pick up that option, etc. But this is, again, a multi-team trade. I assume that these two trades are linked to some capacity, but I'd be interested to see what else winds up happening here. Also, just got an alert from Mark Stein. The Warriors made another run at Nikola Vucevic on the deadline day, but talks fizzled as the teams could not agree on a trade construction. Chris did say earlier today that the Warriors, well, literally 5 minutes ago, that the Warriors are done trading. They'll see what happens on the buyout market. That's fair. Next, moving on from that, the Clippers are kind of active here. So the Clippers are trading Kevin Porter to Milwaukee for Marjon Beauchamp. And I think some of what the Clippers have done today has been more about tax, salary cap flexibility, things like that, roster flexibility going forward, because here's a look at their updated roster with, again, Marjon is already listed here. Shout out to Spot Track. But you see their books are relatively clean for 2026. Aside from that Kawhi, most of their stuff here, Zubac is on that $19 million, but this is pretty flexible a couple of years from now as we see teams starting to gear up towards that offseason where Luka's expected to be a free agent, but there's a number of guys that are also in that area. But moving on from that, another thing that's interesting here is they got off of Terrence Mann as part of another deal in here, where the Clippers sent Terrence Mann and Bones Highland to the Hawks for Bogdanovich and 3 second-round picks. So the Clippers also are in a position where they're trying to get some assets on this team. I don't know if there was any other reason as to why they wanted to trade Bones and Terrence. Maybe they shouldn't think they fit. I like it for the Hawks side. I think that they needed some more on-ball creation if possible. And I'd like it if Bones can potentially get a chance to get some meaningful minutes. I mean, he's a bucket when you put him out there. He can score some points for you. He's a liability on defense, not much of a playmaker for other people, but he can score. So we'll see what happens. But I do think the Hawks could use a little bit more of that. And in terms of Bogdanovich, he's been pretty underwhelming. I believe also dealt with some injury issues this year. Don't know if I love him on the books next year either if he doesn't rebound, and not literally rebound, but rebound in terms of what we're expecting him versus what this year currently is. But that 26-27 year is a team option for $16 million. So he could effectively wind up being an expiring contract next year at $16 million, as a team would, in theory, look to trade for him and then just not pick up that option the following year. So he's got some, again, flexibility that I was kind of talking about here. And there have been trying to make some moves like that across the league. So altogether, really interesting what we've been kind of seeing from some of these teams as they've been trying to maneuver around. But what I will say is there was a report that just came out from Chris Haynes where earlier today he put out a video where he was talking about how Trae really wants to win. And he's saying that the future is kind of murky with them because I don't know if they're on the exact same timeline here. He says that the Spurs were in on Trae Young prior to De'Aaron Fox, but it wound up being easier to get De'Aaron. I'm assuming because De'Aaron told them, I want to go to San Antonio, and that was basically it. And when a player does that, especially when they're approaching a contractual decision like De'Aaron was, it kind of puts the team trading him in a position where it's like, okay, well, if we're going to trade you to, let's just say, I don't know, Atlanta, because we're talking about him, well, you're going to go to Atlanta and tell them you're not going to extend, so they're not going to want to give us anything for it. And so ultimately, I thought that they kind of made out with a good deal for San Antonio and all the teams that were involved, Sacramento, et cetera. But Trae was somebody that they were considering. And I thought, actually, Trae and Wemby would be nice. Wemby is like, okay, let me just say this. Wemby can fit with anybody, but I really think a rim protector, like let's just say AD, I thought would be really good with Trae. Somebody like that, that's a lob threat vertically, would fit perfectly as a second star or a 1A, 1B guy with Trae on their team. But I'm not sure if the Atlanta Hawks are maybe considering going that way. And I said earlier in the video that while Chris is saying that the future is kind of murky, that they're going to potentially have to make a decision on Trae because he wants to be a competitive player, wants to start winning some games. And the Hawks kind of didn't really, let me pull up the roster here. Just based off of my recollection of the moves today, I can't say that they got better. And I think that's interesting, but I'm curious if it's more about flexibility for the Hawks as well. It's kind of a lot to kind of try to cover the entire league, I've realized as well. So if you haven't already, make sure you hit that thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Again, 80% of viewers aren't subscribed, so make sure that you do going forward. So let's see how their books look, excuse me. So Clint, Karras, I'm not sure if they're going to retain either of those guys, to be I like both of those guys as pickups, but I'm not sure that they'll retain them. Other than that, Okongwu here as well as a player that they are going to be investing in and building for going forward. And I guess because you're here. What's up, Trev?
Hey, what's going on? Just jumping in here real quick. Are you talking Trae Young here?
Yeah, I was starting to talk about Trae Young and the fact that I'm not sure if they're going to hold on to him much longer. They may have to make a decision here. And then Chris also reported that the future may be a little bit murky. This was also just a general trade video to wrap up some of the other stuff, but we already
gotcha. Yeah, Chris Haynes, I mean, reported that Trae Young's future is murky. Look at what the Hawks did, trading DeAndre Hunter, and then bringing back Karis LeVert, bringing back George Niang. There's questions about this team now. If Trae Young doesn't feel like this Hawks team is ready to win, right now they're the 9 seed in the Eastern Conference. Mm-hmm. Well, then that could wind up being a situation that Trae Young wants to get out of. And so that's going to be something to definitely keep an eye. I mean, this could be, obviously the trade deadline is passed. This isn't happening now, but this could wind up morphing into the big trade topic of the summer if Trae Young becomes available with Atlanta. Now, they've had these kind of things before. We've had these kind of talks happen previously, and he hasn't wound up moving. But you look, Trae this summer will have 1 more year under contract, and then he's got a player option, which means he can put a lot of pressure on the Hawks this summer if he wants by saying, hey, I'm going to decline that player option. I'm going to hit free agency in 2026. We've already heard about teams lining up cap space for Luka in 2026. With Luka out of the Lakers, it's possible they just pivot and say, you know what, that's going to be the summer of Trae Young. And if that's the case, and Trae says, Hawks, you guys can offer me an extension this summer, I will not be signing it. Boom. He is instantly on the trade market. They would have no choice but to put him out there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think that with the stuff that Chris has been reporting today, that seems like it could actually potentially be pretty likely. I don't know if this team is on the same timeline as Trae Young seems to want to be in. And it was interesting that there were talks about Trae Young potentially going to the Spurs, but they ultimately decided to swing on De'Aaron. He didn't really mention anything about the quality of the players, but it was easier because De'Aaron kind of forced his way specifically to San Antonio. So the asking price for Trae was probably a bit higher, and they decided to take that swing. But it's interesting that, you know, Trae is already starting to have some buzz out there, and I can imagine that he's, like you said, ready to start winning, ready to start getting a better team around him, as he's been kind of in this weird spot with this roster. And it seems like I was saying a second ago, they may be moving in a different direction.
Yeah, they may indeed be moving in a different direction here. If, you know, I think the Hawks would prefer to hang on to Trae Young, of course, but Trae could put a lot of pressure on them should he decide. And you look at, you know, they also had that big expiring contract with Clint Capella, and the thought was that they would be a buyer on the market and turn him into something. But this is maybe the consequence from not necessarily being a buyer and moving off of DeAndre Hunter. And Karis LeVert's a good player, but not being a buyer on the market, that's not going to make your star player who's in his prime super happy. You didn't do anything with Clint Capella's expiring contract. Do they re-sign him this summer? We'll see. He could very well leave in free agency, and then his value just poof, he's gone. Yeah, that's the Hawks didn't do a lot to invest in this team right now. And again, they're the 9 seed. That's not fun. That's not a fun spot to be in. If you're Trae Young, obviously you want to win games. You want to try to make a push and win right now and show how good you are. They're 1-9 in their last 10.
Oh,
Nobody in
brutal.
Atlanta is having fun right now. And if it
brutal.
continues like this, Trae might just be saying, you know what? I'm going to use the leverage that I've got now. Forget your extension. I want out.
Yeah. Do you think that would be a decision for the offseason, next season, maybe next deadline?
Summer, because he can, just like the Kevin Durant situation in Phoenix, where there's rumors that he will not be back with the Suns next year. Kevin Durant, because he is a similar situation where he can be a free agent the next summer with Trae Young. Kevin Durant can direct his own destination. Trae can do the same thing. Let's say the Orlando Magic, just to pick a team out of the blue. Or the Orlando Magic say, we really want Trae Young. And Trae says, no, I hate Disney World. I don't want to go to Orlando. All he has to do is tell the Magic, yeah, you can trade for me, but I will not sign a new deal with you. I will not stay. Next summer, I'll leave. I will play for you for 1 year, and then I will leave because he is 1 year under contract. That is usually enough to dissuade a team from giving up the kind of assets that would need to get a player like Trae, because teams don't want to give up all that much for a guy who's a 1 year rental. So Trae would be able to direct his destination just like Kevin Durant potentially could, and a number of other players that are in this situation could steer themselves to certain teams.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. I guess that's something to watch going forward with these guys, because I was looking at it with the Karis LeVert trade. I didn't necessarily understand it. I like LeVert as a player. I don't think that he's somebody they're going to look to retain going forward, or if they are, maybe it's going to be on a shorter deal or for a smaller number, being that he's already 30. I don't think they're going to retain Clint either. There could be some internal growth from some of their guys, maybe adding in Man on that salary number helps out this team long term. But yeah, I just don't know if they made decisions here to get better. In fact, I'd say they probably got worse.
Yeah, and they picked up some draft capital in the DeAndre Hunter trade, which is helpful,
But that doesn't matter to Trae.
No, that doesn't help Trae. So if I'm the Hawks and I want to keep Trae Young, I need to have a plan for what this summer is going to look like and how I'm going to improve this team. Because if you don't, then very well Trae could be saying, okay, well, then I'm gonna take my talents elsewhere. Where would be the best landing spot for Trae? Like, who should be gearing up to trade for Trae Young right now?
I don't have any idea. Any team that needs another point guard is the obvious answer, but most of the teams don't really need a point guard. I'd have to sit down and think about it. That's the one position I think is really, really saturated in the league, is that starting point guard spot. Maybe a team could get an upgrade for a player, like, say, for example, Sacramento, if they wanted to try to swing for Trae Young. That could be something.
I wonder, is Trae a young enough player to where a team like the Nets might say, you know what, we can get him. We've got the capital. Let's ramp up this whole process and let's go. I don't know, because I do see Trae as more of at least a 1B guy, if not a 1A guy. Whereas like a Brandon Ingram doesn't make sense for the Nets because he's definitely more like a third guy. But Trae is a high enough talent, in my opinion, to where he could be a piece that you really build around, where a Washington, a Brooklyn, somebody like that could maybe get in on a trade there. But other than that, I look at a team like the Miami Heat will always have interest in these top tier players. They'd be a team that I would fully expect to kick the tires and see if there's something they could get done there.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. So I've been waiting for Shams to update this. I was wondering if Cam would be a part of this because we didn't really hear much about Cam today. But the Wizards are sending Marvin Bagley to the Grizzlies as part of the deal as well, with Johnny Davis also sent to Memphis. Yeah. So I'm not really sure what all Memphis is cooking, or maybe if this was just a flexibility move. Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that it was going to be Malcolm Brogdon coming back to Memphis.
Okay. That works.
I can tell you this, the Grizzlies are down bad, though. I mean, that's rough. You gave up 2 first-round picks to get Marcus Smart, and now you're giving up a first to get rid of him. This is a salary dump of Marcus Smart, essentially. And they've got Jalen Wells. They picked up some guys and everything on the wing, but I thought they were going to be able to turn Marcus Smart into something. And if at least figure Malcolm Brogdon coming back would have given them a steady veteran to turn to, but maybe that's not the case here. Surprising stuff, definitely, from Memphis. And you got to be disappointed if you're the Grizzlies to have to burn 3 first-round picks and not really get much out of Marcus Smart.
I didn't even remember that they put together those to get him in the first place.
Yeah.
That's really brutal, and it's only been what, a couple years, year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
That's very brutal for them for sure. So do you think that's maybe the concluded version of this deal? Anything else potentially happening?
I don't know. We'll see if there's anything else coming here. There's probably some other pieces that could come through, but yeah, I mean, look, and also I don't like the Grizz moving off of Jake LaRavia. I thought they should have picked up his option to begin with. I think he's a good player, and Sacramento picked up somebody. I don't like this deadline at all for the Grizzlies. Now, there's word that they were in on Kevin Durant and they wanted to go get him. Mm-hmm. But Durant didn't want to go to Memphis. Why does everybody hate Memphis?
Nobody wants to go to Memphis.
They're so well set up to win right now too.
Maybe it's the jaw headache.
But not a good trade deadline, I think, from Memphis. Like, they needed to add a piece here. They didn't accomplish that, and all they wound up doing is salary dump Marcus Smart. Like, you have a chance in the West. Memphis really does. They really have a chance. They needed to add somebody, and they just didn't really make that happen. So, disappointing trade deadline, in my opinion, for the Grizz.
Yeah, definitely. I guess it remains to be seen what happens with them, and we'll cover that as it comes out. I think with them, aside from that, you can maybe hope for some internal growth because all your guys are still pretty young. Your core guys are there that are young. Your bench guys are all pretty young. In fact, this team doesn't have anybody over 30, over 28. Yep. So this is it's a long-term team. They got a lot of guys on the books for a number of years. So it's interesting to see what they're maybe cooking here. But you're right. They absolutely kind of screwed the Marcus Smart piece. And it's interesting to see that these guys are just not interested in going to Memphis despite them being a top team in the West this year once again. So we'll see what happens. But everyone, if you guys haven't already, make sure that you do check out our recent video where we covered the other trades. I think the last one I did was the DeAndre Hunter piece. And that was an interesting one because we kind of touched on it a little bit today. And we'll see you all later. Take it easy.
And last thing, if Malcolm Brogdon does wind up in the deal, I reverse a lot of what I said about the Grizz. There you go. Just had to get that in.
A little redundant for me with Scotty there, but
sure.
We'll
see. He's something.
He's something. All right, guys. We'll see you later.